Hi, my name is Greg Pyatt, and we're visiting today with Linda Murphy, who is running for State Superintendent of Public Instruction. Glad you're with us.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
You'd shared a few minutes ago when we were talking that you grew up in Cheyenne, out
Yes.
western Oklahoma. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I was born and raised in Cheyenne, Oklahoma, and graduated high school there. Later went to Southwestern Oklahoma State University. Went to college there and got a degree in education. My family, my grandparents were both from Roger Mills County, Cheyenne area. One was over at Hammond, and they both were farmers. So I had a real rural connection, growing up. But we had a business. We had a funeral home and flower shop as I was growing up in high school. And my stepfather was a funeral director, so that's pretty much it. It was a great place to be, and I love western Oklahoma.
Tell me about your family.
I have 4 children and 10 grandchildren. So they range in age from 21 to 7.
And hobbies, or what you like to do in your spare time?
Well, what I really like the most is more reading and history. I really love reading history. Family genealogy, I find that fascinating to see where my family was in history at different points and events, and just expanding that and learning more about it.
What made you mentioned you went to college education. Mm-hmm. What made you want to get into education as a career?
My grandfather called me little teacher when I was about 5. And I had an older cousin, a couple of years older, who I later learned was autistic. But I used to help her, teach her, make sure she had what she needed. And interestingly, as I was studying to get my degree in special education, I realized I had that connection and hadn't really thought about it consciously. So I don't know, maybe kind of meant to be that way, maybe.
This year was a tough year at the Capitol in education, to say the least. Mm-hmm. What do you think about the current conditions of public education, public school funding here in Oklahoma?
Well, like most citizens, I want teachers to be paid well. We need competitive salaries. We want to keep good teachers in place and make sure that they're satisfied and that their needs are being met, that they can take care of their families and the needs that they have. Also, the classroom funding. We need to make sure that we get classroom money for the supplies and materials that teachers need. They should not have to pay their own money to do that. And we know that's been going on for some time, but we need to really get our priorities in order. And I think we do have some regulations and things that eat up a lot of education dollars that we need to refocus and get that into the classroom.
Okay. The salary was very important, and that was addressed during this last legislative session. Besides salary, what do you see as the major challenges that face an Oklahoma classroom teacher?
Class size is a big issue in certain districts. We need to have the funding so that especially the lower grades are not so full that a teacher can't reach each child individually as needed. We know that the growing needs in special education are not being met very well in some areas, in some schools. There needs to be more of an emphasis on following those individualized education plans. I am a special ed teacher and then worked as a consultant in schools with children that had visually related learning problems and helped write IEPs that were specialized in those areas of need. And that worked real well. When we do it right, it works well. But we've seen too many situations where the IEPs have not been followed well, and we're really in a position of liability in certain situations. We need to be concerned about that for the child, first of all, and then certainly for management considerations. We need to do what we say we're going to do on paper.
You bet. The recent school shootings have again highlighted school safety. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on the role the state school superintendent plays, and the State Department of Education plays with school safety?
Well, we need to look at what are the best practices out across the state and nation for not only response, but also prevention. And we need to have policies in place that are solid, proven, with some expert input into the ways that we need to handle situations, again, to prevent and then, hopefully not having to respond, but if we had to be ready to respond in an emergency situation. The State Department of Education has an accreditation office, and through that, regulations, policies, compliance can be checked. And schools, of course, receive state funding if they're accredited. So there is an incentive for schools to follow and to be accredited. So I think as part of the accreditation process, we can certainly look at best practices and policies that need to be in place.
Going back to previous thought, your history and your background, how long, were you a public school teacher? And if you
Yes.
were, where, how long, and a little bit more about your education background?
Sure. Well, I graduated magna cum laude from Southwestern State University, and I got double certification in the areas of special education and learning disabled, teaching the LD students, as well as mentally handicapped, and all the different degrees at that time is the way the certification was. And I also was certified and have been certified for 30 years by the state in these areas. The third area is K through 8 elementary ed. So when I got that certification, it covered up through 7th and 8th grade in several subject areas.
And speaking about funding of education, what are your views, your thoughts on education savings accounts, vouchers?
I've never been supportive of those because I truly believe we've got more than one problem with them. One is government money going into private entities will bring government regulation. So private schools would have some government regulation that would come in where they don't have that now. And the other part of it is that we would be taking public funds from public schools where we obviously know now that we need more funding in certain areas. So I think that is not the way that we should go with education. There are some charter schools that work well in big city areas, Oklahoma City, Tulsa, but they're not automatically better than a public school. They need to be regulated just as we regulate public education. There's some differences in the entrance and retaining students. There's some differences in what is going on in policy. And then I hear people compare them exactly, that this school does better and that does not. And if they're not under the same regulations, you've got two different things you're comparing. So I think we really need to get the regulations shored up. There are some charter schools in Oklahoma City and Tulsa that were audited by our state auditor in the last few years, where he found $3.2 million had been misappropriated of state funding put into a private foundation. So we think of a private foundation and a charter school, the foundation supporting the school, but in this case, the public money in the school supported the foundation. So we've got to really get a close look at all of this, and we need transparency. That's another problem that we could have, and we do have actually, in some of the situations with charters. If they're privately owned, privately managed, then there's a privacy issue there, but we've got public money in there. Yeah. So we need to have transparency of that.
What is your vision, Linda, for the State Department of Education? What do you see as your priorities going forward?
I want the State Department of Ed to be a service agency, to work with teachers and administrators to help make their jobs easier, more efficient, more effective, to be a source of best practices that will improve teacher abilities and performance and the student learning situation. There are many things we can do that within our state we can share, not only from out of state. I think we've had an awful lot of imposed experimental ideas many times to improve education, and we don't listen to our own teachers and administrators. So I want our agency to be a service agency. When I served in the Department of Labor with Brenda Renault as Deputy Commissioner of Labor, we put in a program for safety. And that safety program was to help businesses not be caught under the federal compliance and high fines that were coming with OSHA. And by doing that, we really made a lot of friends. We made the atmosphere much better in the department, and we were seen as a service to the businesses and the people of the state. And that's what I think the State Department of Ed should be.
This past year, POE developed, working with the state legislature leadership in the governor's office, the 60 and 6 plan, which was designed to get a career 25-year classroom teacher to $60,000 in annual pay. Are you supportive of this plan? And if you are, what will you do as State Superintendent of Education to advance the final 3 steps of this plan?
What we need, and I think everyone is painfully aware of it, is we need revenue to fund the plan. You know, certainly the plan is a good plan. $60,000 is certainly a goal that is a worthy goal for a teacher of 25 years. We need the revenue. And so one thing that I'm looking at, that I looked at closely this last year and worked with a legislator who had legislation for this issue, the School Land Office, the Commissioners of Land Office, has revenue that comes in for school land and for the trust. The revenue, the interest, not the trust itself, which has to be left unharmed, certainly, according to our compact with the federal government. But the revenue and the interest is money that belongs right now to education by Constitution. And this past year, it was something like 45% that was given to the schools. So we need to look at how that's being tied up and where it's tied up and how to get that revenue flowing out to education and more block granting to our schools so that they can make decisions. I believe in local control. That's one of the basic tenets of my platform, my policy, is local control. And we've got to give flexibility in how monies are spent sometimes, rather than pocketing it or siloing it in a way that they can't touch it. They can only use it for certain things and maybe have a surplus in one way and a deficit and a need in another way. So these are things, and that has to do with teacher salary as well. When you look at the local school actually paying the salary and the school and the state setting the minimum. We've got ways, I believe, of finding money that has not been appropriately managed. And that doesn't mean always corruption. It just might be a different way of doing it. So that we get that money focused into the classroom, including teacher salaries.
Okay. In your opinion, in light of what's going on today and that the classroom teacher faces, what are the challenges that they're facing in that classroom?
I think what I hear the most and what I feel and see with my friends who teach, people that I know that I talk with all the time, certainly there's a need for a salary that is competitive with other states. It hurts all teachers. When you lose good teachers, it puts more of a load on those that are still there. And when we have new or, inexperienced people brought in, no matter how well they do for a first year, they still are not necessarily taking the place of someone who has had, significant experience. So we really need to get the salary in place. We need to get the supplies, the materials back in the classroom, and a teacher not having to hunt, search, or pay for themselves for the things they need just for daily lessons and teaching. We need to get the class size, again, down to a manageable number of students, and that varies. It varies in situations. It varies in age level, grades, subject matter. Sometimes it depends on what you're teaching. We know that technology has been added in a lot of classrooms, but it's different in different schools. So you have some management there with students who are in the computer part of the time that helps manage the teacher's time a little bit differently. Learning stations, that kind of thing. But I believe that all of these financial needs will make a tremendous difference. But on top of that, I am committed to opposing a top-down control of education. I've done that in 1994 when I ran for state superintendent of schools against Sandy Garrett. I received 49.5% statewide of the vote statewide. And the issue that was really the most prominent concern was that we were getting federal control through outcomes-based education standards and testing that was changing the curriculum, and it really was not developed from Oklahomans within our state. Always we can bring outside expertise in. That's not anything that I would oppose, right. But we need to also rely on the expertise of our own people, and we really need to own it. We need to own it, we need to control it. So the top-down control needs to stop, and the experimentation that comes with that. And I think that has eaten up a lot of the time in advancing our system to a more settled system where we have our academic standards, our curriculum, and our testing aligned. Because right now, our testing is not aligned with what's being taught. We have new testing for the last 2 years. It's nationalized testing, and that's from the Federal Department of Education. That is not what I think most Oklahomans want. It's not what I want. I want to see academic testing that is truly aligned with our own standards. And those standards can be changed if they're not working well.
Thank you, Linda, for being here today. As we've gone through these questions, have you sat there and thought, oh, there's a question that he should have asked? Is there something in your mind?
Not really a specific question. I guess I would just like to add, though, that my vision of education across the state is one of freeing teachers so that teachers can teach. Those teachers who know how to teach and teach well and have been successful, that have been inhibited and have not been allowed to do what they know works for students learning to read, learning to write, doing math. We need to allow teachers to teach and make decisions about curriculum that they will use individually with students. If they think something else needs to be used in a situation, they should have that professional authority. We should respect them and acknowledge their expertise. And those teachers that don't know how to do that can be helped and trained. And I will guarantee you it will make the life come back into the classroom. Teachers who do that now and are free to do that in certain settings, we have a lot of schools that are doing that. We have some that aren't, where there's too much restriction, too much control. And that shuts down the freedom and the creativity of the teacher. And I think, we should want freedom, creative minds. We want our children to be creative in their thinking, not just controlled and regulated. That's what comes with too much regulation. So I'm all for standards, I'm all for accountability, but the way we've been doing it has inhibited learning and teaching. And I want teachers to love teaching and students to love learning.
Linda, thank you for being here today. This is Linda Murphy, candidate for State Superintendent of Public Instruction.